Thank you for joining us at the Evolution of Medicine Summit. A warm welcome. We wanted to make a specific thank you to our sponsors that have made this event possible. Energetics, an innovative natural remedy and supplement company, is committed to revitalizing medicine, and Cyrex Labs, a clinical immunology laboratory specializing in functional immunology and autoimmunity. Most of all, thank you for listening. If you'd like to share this with your colleagues and friends on Facebook if you enjoy the content, and if you have questions, you can ask us on Twitter with the hashtag EvoMed. Finally, if you really want to play your part in accelerating the evolution of medicine, ask your doctor if the Evolution of Medicine Summit might be right for them. Thank you and enjoy. Hello and welcome back to the Evolution of Medicine Summit. This is your host, James Maskell, and it is my distinct pleasure to have as our guest for the beginning of today's events, which are focused on the evolution of nutrition, a doctor who really embodies a lot of the principles of what we're going to be talking about, and I think can speak very clearly to patients and doctors about her experience being a doctor and also being a patient. So Dr. Terry Wahls is here today. She's a clinical professor of medicine at the University of Iowa, where she teaches internal medicine residents. Dr. Wahls has sort of become a cult hero online. She was a patient with progressive multiple sclerosis, which confined her to a tilt-recline wheelchair for 4 years. And Dr. Wahls restored her health using now pedals on her bike every day to work, and is the author of the Wahls Protocol, How I Beat Progressive MS Using Paleo Principles and Functional Medicine, and teaches the public and medical community about the healing power of intensive nutrition. So we've got a lot of nutrition in there, but we've also got some evolutionary principles. And what we're going to be talking about today, in the whole of today's content, Dr. Wahls, is the evolution of nutrition. So thank you so much for being here and for taking time to be on the summit. We really appreciate your work and excited to let more and more people hear about it.
Oh, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
So as the first thing, Dr. Wahls, to talk about, can you just tell us, for those people, there's patients on, there's doctors, can you just tell us from your perspective what MS is and what the causes are, and maybe how your interpretation of MS maybe differs from how the medical community sees MS?
So multiple sclerosis is a condition where the immune cells are attacking the brain and spinal cord, causing damage. And that damage then, over time, finally creates enough damage that a diagnosis can be made. And you need to have 2 lesions separated by time and space, and an abnormal MRI or abnormal spinal fluid. The conventional physicians would then treat with immune suppression and would start with one of the ABCR drugs, Avonex, Betaseron, Copaxone, or move on to one of the newer, more expensive drugs like Tysabri or Gilenya that costing $40,000 to $60,000 a year. And their presumption is that begins with some sort of infection that occurred earlier in life that the body did not properly clear. And this presence of this infection not properly cleared, plus these unknown environmental factors, lead to this chronic immune activation that attacks the brain. My perspective on this is that one can look at all the epigenetic factors that increase the inflammatory reactivity of the body, worsen autoimmune conditions, and make the body more vulnerable to developing an autoimmune diagnosis. And so that means diet and lifestyle have a huge role to play. We can look at things like what organisms are growing in the bowels. Do you have leaky gut? Do you have parasites growing in the bowels, a harmful yeast? Do you have a problem with toxins like heavy metals, mercury being prime examples? Do you have a food sensitivity to gluten, dairy, and other proteins? Do you have improper balance of your hormones, vitamin D status, cortisol status? And by addressing these epigenetic factors and lifestyle factors and diet factors, you can often reduce the inflammatory reactivity and stabilize the disease, often to the point where medications are no longer needed. And that is certainly true for MS, as well as other autoimmune problems as well.
That's amazing. So take us through the different types of therapies that you took for your MS, both initially as sort of a compliant patient, and then your sort of journey towards empowerment.
Sure. Well, I'm thinking I should very quickly recap my story for everyone, and that is that in 2000, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis on the basis of a history of optic neuritis 13 years earlier, weakness in my left leg, lesions in my spinal cord, and abnormal spinal fluid. I had seen that within 10 years, 1/3 of people diagnosed with MS need a cane, walker, or wheelchair, and 1/2 are unable to work because of fatigue disability. At that time, I had 2 young children, ages 9 and 6. I was the primary breadwinner for our family. So I sought out the best MS center I could find, which was the Cleveland Clinic. They looked over my records, said, yes, you have MS, and suggested I take daily Copaxone injections, which I did. Still within 3 years, my disease had transitioned to secondary progressive MS. My doctors told me that at this point there would be no more remissions, no improvements. Functions once lost would be gone forever. And so they recommended that I take a more aggressive approach to my disease and take mitoxantrone, which is a form of chemotherapy, which of course I did. Then I got the tilt recline wheelchair. Then I took the new miracle drug, which was Tysabri, but I continued to decline. And it was apparent that conventional medicine was not going to stop the slide towards a bedridden and demented life. And that's when I decided I had to take matters into my own hands, and I began reading the animal models for MS and other diseases with shrinking brains, because I knew the basic scientists were discovering the secrets that would guide MS therapy in another 50, 75 years.
So what would be the plan? Like the drugs that didn't really work for you, are they working in other cases of MS, and what are they actually doing if they do work?
The first level of drugs, the Avonex, Betaseron, Copaxone, and Rebif, will suppress the immune system often through either the interferon pathways or by making a sort of a parallel compound for the antibodies to attack instead of the myelin. And statistically, they'll reduce the frequency of relapses by just 1/3, which is not much different than placebo, actually. But we're all terrified about becoming bedridden and severely disabled, so we'll take those drugs. Typically, there's a lot of achiness, some pain, flu-like symptoms. And so there's a lot of experimentation trying to find drugs that were much more potent at blocking a very specific step in the immune pathway. Tysabri was the first one of these drugs, and it blocks the entrance of these immune molecules into the brain. And it does so very effectively. It could take the relapse rate down by 60, 65%. But because it's so effective at blocking a specific immune step, it markedly increases the risk for activation of some latent viruses that cause death and severe disability. It also, any drug that is so effective at blocking the immune system will have a long list of side effects, because our immune system is a vital part of normal health and vitality. And it's a vital part of the signaling that goes on between our cells and our organ systems.
Yeah, absolutely. So where did you start looking when you were looking for a new strategy? And was there one particular moment that sort of catalyzed this search?
Well, I'm going to take you back in 2002. I'm still walking around. So my neurologist told me about Dr. Ashton Embry and Dr. Lauren Cordain. I read Cordain's book. I looked over his research papers and decided that his advocacy for a paleo diet as a strategy to treat MS made sense. And so after 20 years of being a vegetarian, I resumed eating meat and added that back to my diet. But I continued to decline. And when I hit the wheelchair, I decided, as I said earlier, to start reading the basic science. I read about animal models for MS, and I found papers that had used vitamins and supplements to protect these mouse brains. I translated those mouse-sized doses to human-sized doses, slowed my decline, and I was very grateful, but of course I was still declining. In the summer of 2007, I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine, and I took their course, a neuroprotection, a functional medicine approach for common and uncommon neurologic syndromes, and learned a great deal, had a longer list of vitamins and supplements that I added. I also discovered electrical stimulation of muscles, which I started doing. And this may have caused some mild improvement. And then I had, was really the brilliant awareness that I should take my long list of nutrients, and rather than getting them from synthetic pills and supplements, I should figure out where they were in the food supply. So that was more research. But finally, I had a list of the foods I needed to stress, and I reorganized my eating, still according to paleo principles, but to get these, we're now basically 31 key vitamins, minerals, fats, antioxidants. And when I did that, that is when the magic began to happen. 3 months later, my fatigue was gone. I had to stop the protocol that I'd been on for 6 years because of severe fatigue disability, because my energy was up and I couldn't sleep at night. Then at 6 months, I was walking throughout the hospital without a cane. And at 9 months, I was able to bike again. In fact, I did a 18-mile bike ride with my family. And so this really transformed how I understood disease and health, and it transformed my approach to patients. I still wrote prescriptions, made my usual diagnoses, but I spent a lot more time talking to my patients about diet and lifestyle, talking to them about the fact that diet and lifestyle creates either a healthy, vigorous, disease-resistant phenotype, that is, body, the appearance of our body, or our diet and lifestyle create an inflamed, sickly, disease-prone phenotype. And most of the diet and lifestyles under our choice.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was specific to MS. First of all, what was it like in that recovery period, seeing other doctors or peers in the hospital system, seeing you improve? Like, what was their sort of feedback, or what was it like to have those kind of conversations with people that probably had never seen something like this before?
You know, when I was first diagnosed with MS and I first appeared in my wheelchair, people would say, "Oh my God, Dr. Wahls, what happened?" And then I'd have to explain about the MS. And so imagine the thrill it was when I was walking in the hospital without a cane, and people would stop and say, like, "Oh my God, Dr. Wahls, you're walking and without a cane." And of course, they wanted to know what had happened, and I was happy to tell them. And people were stunned. I ended up being invited to give a grand rounds to the Department of Medicine on a case report of what happened to me and what I thought the mechanisms were. That was very well received, and led ultimately to assembling a team to write a protocol so that we submitted a grant, got funding, and then launched our first of our clinical trials, testing my protocol in others with progressive MS.
That's amazing. So where does that stand now?
So we had our trial. We started enrolling people in 2010. It's a 3-year trial. We've had our, and really, it's very exciting because we've had our first paper published, and it was what we call a feasibility safety study. So we had to show that people could do it, and yes, they could. They did the diet, the exercise, the meditation, and we could show that the biggest side effect, Jim, was that if you were overweight, you lost weight without being hungry, and you got back to an ideal body mass. The other thing that we showed was the effect size on fatigue. And fatigue is the most common reason people with MS have to stop working. It's very difficult to treat. The drugs that treat fatigue will make an improvement about 0.5, 0.6 on the 7-point fatigue severity scale. So when we published our data, people presented at a fatigue scale of 5.7 and ended up with a fatigue score of 2.4. So an overall improvement of 2.5, which is really incredibly positive benefit. And when we look at PubMed to see what else is being reported for fatigue, no one else has this kind of effect size. It really is quite remarkable. We now have a larger group that has completed the 12 months of study, and we're writing more papers up talking about fatigue, change in gait, change in thinking ability, MRI changes, and of course changes in nutrition.
It's amazing. So what do you think we can apply from this knowledge to other diseases? Because there's a lot of other diseases out there that have a significant lifestyle component, and there are also a lot of other diseases out there that have it's not really clear what the cause is. It's not just a single cause. There's multiple causes. What do you think is there other things that we can take away from your experience and from MS generally to sort of start to apply to other types of chronic or autoimmune diseases?
So for all of our chronic diseases, science is clearly showing us that there's usually multiple genes involved that each individually increase your risk maybe 1% or so. And it's this complicated interaction with your genes and these environmental factors. And these environmental factors can turn genes on, turn genes off, to move you away from a healthy phenotype to an inflamed, disease-prone phenotype. And because of that, it really means that when we use drugs control symptoms, but the drugs don't change the phenotype. They don't change the environmental factors that created that inflamed, disease-prone phenotype. And so whenever we're relying on drugs to treat someone's illness, we control symptoms, but we're doing nothing about the underlying root cause of why that person became ill, which is the development of that phenotype that is inflamed, sickly, and disease-prone. And at the root cause, that phenotype comes in mostly diet and lifestyle factors. So that means my observations about how I'm treating MS is applicable to probably nearly every chronic disease. And in my clinics, I use these concepts in primary care to take care of high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, mental health problems, other autoimmune problems. And time again, I see people come in, energy's improved, fatigue is reduced, mental clarity is up, blood pressures are normalizing, blood sugars are normalizing, and people stay with the diet and lifestyle. In 6 months, they're needing fewer drugs. In a year, we're decreasing drugs further. And in 2 or 3 years, they're often on half the drugs and sometimes even none of the medication, because they've had that much healing. And that includes people with an autoimmune problem, that we're often able to stabilize them and regress their disease and able then to wean carefully, slowly, getting them off their immune-suppressing drugs.
That's amazing. It's very exciting because from what I hear from autoimmunity, it's similar to chronic disease, like where you have pre-cancer or pre-diabetes. There's predictive autoimmunity, right, where you can have these environmental factors and you have a leaky gut where basically you're not quite hitting the levels of symptoms to hit officially autoimmune or whatever disease you have, but you're on the way to it. So, as the old saying goes, may you never know what you prevented. There's probably people out there who, if you can just use the protocol, you can start to stave off these autoimmune diseases as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. There are 25 million with a autoimmune diagnosis, another 50 million that have a lot of pain, suffering, brain fog, fatigue, autoantibodies, but not enough damage to make a diagnosis yet. So they're sort of that pre-autoimmune diagnosis problem. And that's 50 million. Those people are going to be particularly benefited by following the Wahls protocol, doing the diet and lifestyle, because their disease is less advanced. They'll have a little more organ reserve. We will be able to stabilize their condition more quickly. energies improve more quickly, mental clarity improves more quickly. And so they are excellent, excellent candidates for these kind of diet and lifestyle interventions.
That's great. So can you just sort of explain to the audience out there the sort of the emerging model in functional medicine that we're understanding for how this autoimmune disease occurs, through the genetics and the environment and the leaky gut? Sure.
Some great work by Dr. Fasano that has identified a leaky gut, that there are zonulin receptors that can be stimulated by bacteria. It can be stimulated by gluten in the genetically susceptible person. That opens the gates in the small bowel so that incompletely digested food passes through the small bowel into the bloodstream, as well as some bacterial particles. And this incompletely digested food activates the immune cells, particularly if you are genetically vulnerable. And about a third of North Americans and Northern African descended individuals do have the genes that make them vulnerable to developing a marked immune response to the gluten and the casein protein. So your immune proteins skyrocket. Your body can clear that for a few years, but eventually you're not clearing that, and it's beginning to cause damage into your body and into your brain. And that's when these symptoms begin to occur, and you're likely to develop an autoimmune problem, autoantibodies. Depending on your unique mix of DNA and life experiences, you may have the attacks on your skin to develop psoriasis or eczema, or on your joints to develop rheumatoid arthritis, or on your brain to develop MS. There are other factors that can also be a way to get these problems. Another is heavy metal toxicity. Lead, mercury in particular, arsenic to a lesser degree, can also create this heightened immune responsiveness and increase the probability of developing an autoimmunity. There is molecular mimicry. Our bacteria and viral particles over time have evolved to have amino acid sequences that look like ours because that allows them to hide more effectively from immune cells. And the problem is, if a bacteria has an amino acid sequence that looks like my myelin, then when my immune cells go after that bacteria to finally try and clear it out, it may begin to also attack my own myelin, that is my brain and spinal cord as well.
So it just attacked your myelin because you were genetically susceptible to that, and it was just it was a combination, but for different people, it would sort of end up coming out in different ways or attacking different parts, thyroid or other
Correct.
areas in the body. Okay.
And the triggers can be food sensitivity, it can be heavy metals, it can be a prior infection that has a similar amino acid sequence, so it looks like part of my own structures.
Yeah, that's really amazing. We'll have more on that information throughout the summit on the evolution of autoimmunity and so forth. This is really exciting because it seems that in a certain way it's maybe a little easier to be able to treat these kind of patients because you have a roadmap back, whereas if you're just using drugs, the roadmap is really just to keep the symptoms under control until the eventual happens, right?
Well, you're right. So drugs control symptoms. They don't get to the root cause of why the immune cells became so activated and why they're attacking self. The functional medicine piece gives people some ways of looking at triggers that cause this overreactivity of the immune cells and ways of quieting that excessive inflammation down at the very root cause.
That's perfect. And there'll be there's a lot of people already speaking on the summit about functional medicine on the first day. We had Dr. Jeff Bland's talk on his work and particularly his new book, The Disease Delusion. Have you had an opportunity to look at that, Dr. Wahls?
Oh my God, yes. I love that book. And I think that will be very helpful for both the patients, the public, to understand this new way of thinking about disease and health. And it will be helpful for clinical people who are tired of seeing their patients get worse year after year, needing more and more drugs, and beginning to understand that there's another way of thinking about it. Yeah. He has just a wonderful conversation about epigenetics and how the environment is speaking to our genes and determining whether or not we have a healthy, wild, disease-resistant body or an inflamed, sickly, disease-prone body. And that's a very key concept for the public and our young physicians to learn.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited to be able to share this. There'll be physicians listening to this right now, and if you are, I don't need to go into the whole. We don't need to go into the whole functional medicine model right now because there's been a lot of other talk on that. And this weekend we have the whole medical conference where we'll get a lot more on that. So maybe just for today, Dr. Wahls, what I'd love to get into next, because I know that this is a big part of your diet, and what you saw as sort of at the core of all of this was mitochondria and the mitochondria function. Can you explain what the mitochondria is doing, what it is, and how it relates to brain cells in sort of a way that we can all understand?
So about 1 billion years ago, the Earth was covered with a terrible poison, wiped out, I believe, a majority of life on Earth. And this poison turned out to be oxygen. But there were some bacteria that were able to utilize this oxygen to generate energy in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, more effectively. And these little bacteria were engulfed by bigger bacteria, and the two developed a very cooperative relationship. And over time, these little ancient bacteria would become mitochondria, and the larger bacteria would evolve into a multicellular animal that would eventually become primates, and it eventually would become us. And so that every animal has in its cells these ancient bacteria, which are really our mitochondria. And these mitochondria generate energy more efficiently. The cells that need the most energy, brain cells, retina cells, and heart cells, will have about 10,000 mitochondria per cell. And you can get a sense of, are the mitochondria working very efficiently? If you have lots of energy, great mental clarity, good heart, good vision. But if you're beginning to have declining energy, you're exhausted, you're relying on lots of shots of caffeine to get through the day, or you're having problems with your retina and macular degeneration, or problems with heart failure, that's a very good clinical indication that the mitochondria are not working as well. They're become very inefficient at producing energy, and that the person would do very well to get what I call a mitochondria tune-up based on the concepts I discuss in my book.
Yeah, this whole conference is called, or the summit is called, the evolution of medicine. This is an extremely evolutionary concept, understanding how these mitochondria in humans work very synergistically.
Yes. It's sort of ironic. In medical school, I had to memorize, countless reactions involving my mitochondria, but I was never taught what I had to feed them to be sure that all those reactions could happen properly. I was left to have to find that on my own, and that really is the basis for the type of nutritional plan that I created, because I was really trying to create the best nutrition possible at the cellular level.
And so what does that look like from your perspective now? What should we be eating for, if we were just eating for our mitochondria, what should we be eating, and would it be different from what optimal nutrition is?
Yes, it's going to be quite different, and I'll tell you it'll be different from a lot of paleo diets. A lot of paleo diets are pretty heavy on meat and not much on vegetables. My diet is focused much more on vegetables with sufficient meat. So we have 3 cups of green leaves, and any green edible leaf is fine. Big salad or cooked greens. Then 3 cups of sulfur-rich vegetables in the cabbage, onion, mushroom family, because sulfur is critical for the brain. It is critical for the mitochondria as well. and 3 cups of deeply pigmented vegetables and berries, so like carrots, beets, peppers, or berries. And then I like to have 6 to 12 ounces of meat, fish, preferably grass-fed or wild game or wild fish, so you can have plenty of the omega-3 fats. I want organ meat at least once a week, preferably 2 or 3 times, because you're going to get more vitamins, minerals, coenzyme Q, carnitine, lipoic acid, all of which are most excellent support for your mitochondria. And then I look for seaweed, because seaweed gives you iodine, selenium, trace minerals, and life, as you recall, began in the oceans. And these trace minerals are vital catalysts for many, many of our enzymatic steps.
Yeah, absolutely. So the diet that you have, that you've developed, the Wahls protocol, would you say that this is an important diet for people looking to recover from an autoimmune disease, or are these things that most people should be doing to sort of stave off the potential of predictive autoimmunity?
Well, in my research team, I have undergraduate students that volunteer because they want to get involved in research. So I always have them do the study diet for 2 weeks, keep the logs so they can get a sense of just what we're asking our study subjects to do. So these are kids in their early 20s, should be at the top of their game. And so far, I'd say all of them are surprised at how much more mental clarity they have, how much more energy they have, how much better their attention is. And many of them discover that their migraines are gone, their severe periods are much less of a problem, their attention is better, their joint pains are gone. And I've had people who are athletes contact me to say that their athletic performance took a big jump up when they found my protocol. So for those who want to have optimal performance, this is a great protocol. For those who have an autoimmune condition, this is a great protocol. In my book, I do give them step ways of making the diet, progressively more rigorous if you have greater health challenges. But this is a superb place to start that journey towards reclaiming your health.
Absolutely. So physicians who aren't recommending any sort of dietary changes and are treating these types of diseases, for those physicians who are listening to this, or medical groups that don't have these kind of things in place, maybe are only doing dietary changes for heart disease or those kind of things, can you just share from your experience and the science that you've seen out there, how much are we missing the boat on this?
Epigenetics is the most exciting area of science right now, and it's looking at how the environment speaks to my DNA and can make some genes active, other genes inactive. And literally every aspect of my environment is continually talking to my genes. What is getting very exciting is looking at what are these environmental factors under our control that are shifting whether my phenotype, that is my appearance and performance of my body, that healthy disease-resistant phenotype, or that sickly, inflamed, disease-prone phenotype. And the old farts like me, too many of these old docs don't realize that it's diet, it is toxin exposure, it is exercise, it is sleep quality, and stress level that are probably the 5 biggest areas where the environment can make a healthy phenotype into a sickly one without changing the DNA. And if we teach people how to address their diet, maximally nutrient dense, get rid of the sugar, processed foods, reduce their toxins, move their bodies, sleep 7 hours, and have a stress-reducing activity every day, and to begin, one by one, adapting those behaviors, they will shift their phenotype away from that inflamed, sickly, disease-prone, steadily towards that healthy, vigorous, disease-resistant. And it will take about 3 years to get the transition, but even in just 2 weeks, people can see and experience a significant reduction in symptoms, a significant uptick in energy levels. It's really quite remarkable.
That's amazing. So I'm here in New York and you're there in Iowa. I mean, I can walk out and I can go to different supermarkets that have these kind of things. Obviously, you have in a little bit more farming country, but potentially not as many choices. How easy is it to do the Wahls protocol in Iowa compared to a major metropolitan city? Have you got all the resources around you to make that easy?
Yeah, actually, I'd say it's really quite easy. You've got grocery stores, we have farmers markets. In Iowa, it's easy to grow your food. So if you have access to sunshine in your container garden, grow green, sulfur-rich vegetables, color pretty easily. And I do talk about the critical role of trying to get control of your food supply, growing more of your own food, buying food from your farmer if you can, getting it from a community-sponsored agriculture. In a large urban area, there are grocery stores, Whole Foods, health food stores, but there are in many urban communities food deserts where you can't get fruits and vegetables. And in those urban deserts, that really is the root cause of much of the epidemic of worsening diabetes, obesity, heart disease, mental health problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, it takes a lot, but also you have to think that as you start spending money on those types of things, the demand goes up and things change as a result. You sort of vote with your wallet.
Well, absolutely. Every day we make choices. We vote with our forks and our wallet what food we want. And we could, get rid of the sugar, the white flour, and eat vegetables, fruit, and meat, and reclaim more health and vitality. Part of the problem is that we're addicted to the sugar, the white flour, that quick glucose rush. And so for many people, they're going to have to experience that withdrawal as they get away from that bad food.
Yeah, that's not always easy. Let's mention some of the other things we've spoken about, some of the protocols you've very eloquently shared about the specifics: vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, antioxidants. Are there any other things that the body needs for optimal function that we haven't spoken about thus far?
We'll need minerals, we'll need trace minerals, we'll need fats, amino acids. Your body can make carbohydrates out of fats or amino acids, so we can get by with a lower carb diet, but you'll have to be careful about vitamin C, vitamin K, and the antioxidants.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about some of the other non-drug things that you can do for health. I know you mentioned sleep and hormone issues, muscles. What are some other things you can do?
So we'll talk physical activity. When we were hunter-gatherers, men traveled 6 to 9 miles, women 2 to 3 miles. But now we sit in front of our computer screen 8 to 10 hours a day. That inactivity is very inflammatory, very damaging. So moving, very important. Sleep. If you don't sleep, your brain becomes disorganized, you hallucinate, you become psychotic. And why we sleep is when we make more hormones, when we process our toxins and eliminate them more effectively, and when we're most effective at fighting infection. And though we could do well to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night, in the last 100 years, I believe Americans have lost an hour and a half to 2 hours of sleep. And that is damaging to all those processes that I mentioned. It also increases our inflammation and shifts us away from that healthy, disease-resistant phenotype towards that inflamed, disease-prone phenotype. And then, let's see, we've talked about sleep, activity.
How about detoxification? Because you just mentioned how much of an issue these metals and chemicals and so forth are for all kinds of brain issues, but also all these autoimmune diseases. What are some strategies that you use to help people? Because detox is kind of a fad word, but it's happening all the time, right?
Well, correct. I would remind people, in addition to the chemicals that we're exposed to, and there's 90,000 that are now registered with the EPA, our kids are born with more than 200, plastic solvents, pesticides, herbicides, heavy metals in their little bodies at birth, and they just will accumulate more. So trying to intentionally use organic personal care products, home cleaning products, eat organic foods. And then you want to upregulate the enzymes that will do your processing and elimination of toxins. And that's why I've designed the Wahls diet the way I have, with the emphasis on green leaves, the vegetables in the cabbage family, onion family, mushroom family, and the bright colors. Because that combination of food will increase the enzymes that we use to process and eliminate toxins. So you can eliminate them much more effectively. And because to remove lead, mercury, arsenic, that's better with iodine on hand. Having more seaweed in your diet and iodized sea salt will also be very helpful at the ability to clear heavy metals.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I think those will be useful tips to anyone who's listening. So just as far as, your work now, Dr. Wahls, I mean, I saw you the first time on YouTube, and your TEDx talk has been a massive sensation, almost closing in on a couple of million views. Do you have people who contact you from that TEDx talk? It seems to be a good way to get information out there.
Right. It's a great way to get information. We've had 1.72 million people have seen that talk. I've certainly touched more people than most physicians ever will in their lives through that talk. But this last spring, TED, the big organizer, weren't sure about my science, asked Cliff Misson, the guy who was the curator and organized the TED Talk, for the scientific justification for my statements. So we sent the various posters and abstracts that we've presented at scientific meetings around the country. We sent our publications to them, and they were still unhappy enough that they put a big warning box on my TED Talk, saying that the talk falls outside the curatorial guidelines, viewer discretion advised. And so that's been up, I think, since January.
So what has that meant for the number of people watching it, or the response? Have you had any change in that?
Well, we continue. I'd say the trajectory of new views each month has not changed. And I see a lot of comments from people saying that it was quite apparent, at least from their perspectives, that TED's sponsors, which are pharmaceutical companies, and Monsanto, which manufactures Roundup and GMO products, that they must be influencing TED's editorial decisions, or perhaps TED is self-censoring because they don't want to risk losing the money from these big corporate sponsors. I'm not sure which it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's certainly, it's certainly something to keep an eye on. I know TED is generally not being too excited about concepts in functional medicine or otherwise, but it seems like as more and more science comes out about it, whether it be your science or other science that's coming out, eventually this will, if it's not TED, there'll be other ways to use the internet to get the word out there.
Yes. I believe Mind Body Green, which is a new blog, will be having an event revitalized this year as well. And they are seeking to create a TED-like experience with TED-like talks that they will promote on the internet that will not have that kind of corporate censorship. Yeah, so I think it's quite possible other entities will begin to create TED-like events, and TED may be replaced by other more innovative groups.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I'm looking at the TED sponsors now, and you see some of the likely candidates like Merck and other ones that potentially. Who makes those other drugs that traditionally treat MS?
Well, Novartis, GlaxoSmithKline, the autoimmune drugs are a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so there are many, many drug companies pouring millions and millions of dollars into making these drugs that will block very specific steps in the immune pathway, because they see they can charge $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year for these drugs. Huge moneymakers. As I said, with a huge side effect, I find it sad that we give these very potent drugs So people can continue to have a terrible diet, poor lifestyle, a disease-prone phenotype, rather than telling patients the truth that they could create a healthy phenotype that was disease-resistant if they would learn to eat green, sulfur-color, grass-fed meat, organ meat, and seaweed, move their bodies, and meditate every day.
Absolutely. So where do you see the next few years for Dr. Terry Wahls? I mean, obviously doing more on this and more publicity, but are there any particular goals that you have professionally or otherwise that you feel like you can take on from here?
Well, I'm continuing to grow our research program. We'll be sending more grants in. I've sent in grants to study my protocol in other disease states. We've got one cooking for fibromyalgia. We're working on another for Parkinson's and for obesity. My publishers asked me to put in some book proposals for another round of books. The public's asking me to build a membership site so we could provide more coaching for a larger group of people. I'm very excited. I think the public is very interested. I think clinicians are very interested in developing more tools to help them adopt the Wahls protocol, either professionally in their clinical practices or personally in their individual lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there are doctors listening who, traditionally haven't given any dietary advice, why do you think that some of these Paleolithic concepts are interesting and valuable for them to take as a starting point to recommend to patients?
Well, we're trying to get more nutrient-dense diets. Several studies, the Keltons did a great study looking at nutrient density of common diets, and they saw that the paleo diets were more nutrient dense than the standard American diet, the American heart, American diabetic diet. So a huge, big step forward. The Wahls diet, because it was constructed specifically to maximize nutrient density, is, I think, the most nutrient dense of all the diets out there. And the nutrition experts and physician scientists will agree that the best approach for health is the most nutrient density per calorie that you can find. And so that will always be an excellent place to start.
That's great. And I can see, more and more physicians are being asked by their patients what to eat. And if they don't know, the patients are voting with their feet and going to people who do know. So I think, more and more physicians will start to really realize that this is something that they're not going to get in medical school, but there are lots of other organizations to go and get this kind of training. So that's exciting. So, Dr. Wahls, I mean, when you were in your wheelchair and it was 2007, did you ever imagine that you would be this multi-book writer, doing TED Talks and so forth? I mean, how has your vision expanded in the time since it was just focused on getting well to now, where this could possibly go as a movement?
As a matter of fact, when I started my diet, my only hope was to slow the decline. I had accepted that I could never recover. And I had to be dramatically better, including walking around without a cane, before I allowed myself to hope that full recovery might be possible. And now that this last weekend, I was jogging on my treadmill, 10 minutes, I'm very pleased to say, nonstop. That was a new landmark for me. I can begin to see that an athletic life is coming back to me. I see tremendous possibilities, and I feel like there is no limit.
That's so exciting. And what would you just tell to other patients who are looking down the barrel of an autoimmune disease like MS and facing this same sort of situation now? Like, where should they start?
We mistakenly bought the message that our DNA caused our disease. The DNA does not cause chronic disease. The DNA interacts with your food choices, your choices in movement, toxin exposure, activity level, stress, sleep, and every aspect of your life that will speak with your genes to create the health of your body. And your body can either be healthy, disease resistant, or inflamed, sickly, disease-prone. Health is not going to be from your drugs. It will be from learning how to take your diet and lifestyle choices to the most health-promoting ones that you can make. And it starts one step at a time. It will be easier to do this with your family and with the support of friends, but begin the journey. And I'll tell you, my book, The Wahls Protocol, is one roadmap to help you find that journey on how you can address diet and lifestyle to create that healthy, disease-resistant phenotype that will begin your recovery.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. And so I guess just the last question that I want to ask today, Dr. Wahls, is you have a really unique perspective on this evolution of medicine because you're interested in evolutionary nutrition. You're interested, you've seen this new type of medicine, work for yourself in your own progressive disease that you've now reversed. If you look out now and you say, like, looking at the evolution of medicine, you mentioned, groups of people getting together and how important that is. Obviously, technology is just around the corner. What are your sort of hopes, fears, and aspirations for this next evolution of medicine?
I'm very optimistic about the power that we have through the internet, the social media, the online communication, our membership sites, that allow us to teach. Instead of putting up my message out one by one, I can reach, I've reached 1.7 million people. We are able to get this message, hope, healing, of using diet and lifestyle, of the fact that we all have more control, much more completely. And so I am immensely optimistic that I think the public will hear this message thanks to the internet, thanks to social media, and the public will race ahead of the medical profession. Fortunately, there'll be medical professionals, health coaches, nutritionists who will be there to help teach the public that's eager to hear this. But this is a very exciting time. And I think, in fact, that we'll be able to have wonderful breakthroughs that can happen because of the internet, because of the social media, because people can hear each other talking about their own healing experience.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, this is certainly, we're just getting started. And, my intention with this summit is certainly to, year after year, bring out those people that are innovating, to bring medicine forward and to evolve medicine. I really feel like, you're a great example of that. And I look forward to, seeing how your science and the other projects that you're working on continue to take this forward. As someone who's, in family, my family has definitely dealt with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease and other things. It's a really empowering message and, something that I intend to take far and wide. So any last thoughts before we finish here on the evolution of medicine or otherwise?
This summit, like many others, is a wonderful service and is part of the wonderful things that are happening. Thank you for putting it together. And we're all doing very important work. So thank you.
No, thank you, Dr. Wahls. So, I appreciate that. And thank you so much for being part of it. This has been the Evolution of Medicine Summit. This is Evolution of Nutrition Day. We've been here with Dr. Terry Wahls talking about how she beat progressive MS through functional medicine and paleo concepts. It's been so great to be with you. Definitely go and get the book. Give the book to a loved one if they are struggling with this or any other types of chronic or autoimmune disease. Extremely empowering message. And thanks so much for being here today. And we'll see you next time.